So, hi, Jade. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So everybody, I'm Amy Stewart, and I'm the author of this book, The Tree Collectors, Tales of Arboreal Obsession. And Jade Wheeler is the narrator of the audiobook. And I'm so excited to meet you. This is the first time we've met. We've never talked before, except very short emails and
Yeah.
stuff on social media. So I'm super excited to talk to you. And also to let all of you guys get your burning questions answered about how audiobooks and audiobook narrators do what they do.
Awesome. I'm
Awesome.
excited. What you said.
Well, and you live in Belgium, but you're in the States right now to see family. So we were
Yes.
able to get you kind of at a good time zone.
Yes.
Can you tell us just like a little bit about yourself? But also, I'm super curious how you came to live over there. I'm so jealous.
Um, well, don't be jealous. If you complained about the weather, don't be jealous of Belgian weather. We have good beer. The short version is, as you know, I'm an actor. And in the States, I was a regional actor, so performing all over the country. But of course, it's not, 365 days of the year.
Right.
So during in between shows during my breaks, I would just say, oh, I have 2 weeks, I'll pop over here, I'll pop over there. And I happened to be in Europe um, when I met my now partner.
Uh-huh.
So that was the short version of how we met, and he already had kids.
Oh,
And so that's why it was like, okay, well, I guess I'm coming here versus him coming to the States. But i'm
okay.
always i'm always up for a new adventure.
Yeah.
I think as creative people, at least my journey, I like to think that I'm malleable and open to new experiences. I think that informs, performances and the things that we write and the art that we make.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's how I
And
ended up there.
that's how you ended up there. And so I think it's so interesting that that actors have moved into doing audiobooks. I don't know that it was always the case. But I feel like as audiobooks have really exploded in popularity, in part because digital downloads just made it like a physically easier thing to do,
Yeah.
that there was a real need for people who could bring a voice to books and not just sort of read it, but actually kind of make it something. And so, of course, actors are the perfect people to do that.
Well, it's so funny that you said that. So I mean, audiobooks started, what books on tape, of course, we all know, but as well as books being read for the blind, for
Uh-huh.
example, that was a
Right.
huge thing.
Right.
And coming from the DC area, a lot of my colleagues were doing that.
Oh,
So just
okay.
sort of in between, same thing, sort of in between theater gigs, which again aren't 100% of the year.
Right.
Oh, I'm gonna read this 500-page whatever because someone needs it. And then it was just really who's available, who has the time, who's in our roster, um, who's physically available. Because, like you were saying before, it had to work both ways. You needed someone who could come in the studio
Yeah.
as well, and also what's changed a lot is now, maybe looking for authentic voices
Mhm.
is a lot more sought after versus before it was just we need someone who's talented and we need someone who's available in
Right.
the area and who speaks this language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing for me with this book, but it's also been true in the past. So, for anyone who's not sure how this works, sometimes authors are given consultation on who the audio narrator can be. And sometimes we're not. So, like, I was not consulted for a bunch of my books because it was just how that was. But then for certain ones, they consulted with me. And sometimes they'll send you clips of a few different people and say, what do you think of which of these three do you like? Or which of, whatever. And what I thought about, especially for tree collectors, was I wanted it to feel conversational. Like I tried to write in as much of a conversational way as I could, given the kind of book it was. But also, there's all these other voices. Like I'm trying to let other people speak. So it's, it's not a novel where you have however many characters you have and they have their voices. It's 50 people who are each living in their own little world, telling their own little stories. So I don't know, like, what did you think of that? Like, when it came to you, what was your reaction?
To be honest, I remember being really excited about it actually. When Linda contacted me, because my dad, I was actually just telling my dad about this. I was geeking out a little bit. I was just telling my dad about it because he's huge into plants. I don't know if he would call himself a horticulturalist, but he is. And
Okay.
my father-in-law as well,
Uh-huh.
and a good friend of mine. So I
Oh,
was
wow.
super excited about the book, for several reasons. One, because I did enjoy the 50 different perspectives.
Mm.
I love nonfiction. I love the outdoors. And in the same way that we were saying, you tried to make it conversational. Part of me, what I was reading, it was wondering how much of this was just a conversation that you're writing. Did you record them? I was also curious about how your interview was conducted, because I felt that it was so easy. I mean, their voices were just there. We didn't
Uh-huh.
really have to search so much. I have no idea what most of those people sounded like. I found a
Right.
lot of audio, not audio, yeah, audio and like YouTube clips of a few of the people. So when I had that reference, that was really fantastic, just to sort of understand their point of view a little bit more. But it
Oh,
wasn't about
interesting.
putting on a voice or anything. How you were able to write it, their voice was just there. So that's not always the case.
Huh. Well, that's interesting because, like, in fact, I did a lot of these interviews over Zoom because I wrote this book during COVID. So what that means is I do have recordings of everybody. Like, I didn't, it didn't occur to me to even offer that up, or like nobody really asked, but it's like, and I don't know if you got this. I reached out to everybody to ask them for the correct pronunciation of their names.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to be very fair about the whole thing. So I was like, I sent it to everyone. And I was like, if you have a name that's super easy for Americans to pronounce, like Tom Hanks or Taylor Swift, then you can just tell me that and she will do what she does. But if you're at all uncertain about how an
Mm-hmm.
American would say your name, send it. So you got all these little, I assume you got these little recorded
Yeah.
snippets where people go like, "Hi Amy, here's how I say my name." And you got like that of them.
I don't think I got that, but
Oh,
I did get how everyone was pronounced, but I didn't get the hi and the rest of it.
oh, really?
That's okay.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I'm not gonna lie. We're always grateful for anyone offering the pronunciation of their name, because I might think it's Tom Hanks, and they're like, you know what? We say Tom,
Honks.
honks with a
Right.
long, or the K is pronounced like a G because it's short. It's like, oh my. Yeah. So
Yeah.
never assume, I will never ever assume that I know how anyone says their name anymore.
Right. Right. Yeah, I can
You might
imagine.
think it's so straightforward, actually, where we're
Right.
from. Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, and in this book, you had a lot of plant names. There was a fair amount of
Gosh,
botanical Latin.
that Latin.
Sorry about that.
And no one agrees on the Latin.
Right.
No one agrees on
Yes.
Latin. But I had a fantastic director, Tara Thomas, who did a lot of that heavy lift, the Latin heavy lifting for me. And we, and sometimes, sometimes we had each found maybe a different source. And then there was some go to sources. There was like the
Yeah.
Green Thumb. There were a few places where we were like, okay, this is what we're going to follow. And then we
Right.
still got, some notes later on. But,
Interesting.
we want it to sound as accurate as possible for a language that none of us have heard, but for the people in that world, that they would say, yes, this is how it's pronounced, you know,
Right. Right.
because that's how they all, the monkey hand one was particularly difficult. I remember it. I mean, it was a hoot. I learned so much. I don't care. I learned so much. I had so much fun.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear it. Well, and so what is the process like? Walk us through, and especially, you did this from Belgium. It's not like you went to New York and sat in a Random House studio or anything like that.
That would
So
have been
walk us through
fantastic. I
from
did not.
beginning to end. Like what happens? You get an email, hey, are you available to do this? And then what are the steps?
Yeah. So, like you said, depending on if it's a direct offer, and you are available during that time slot, then you get the maybe it's still a draft script or a draft text,
Uh-huh.
and then they'll say, you know what, the recordable meaning now it's not change anymore. This is the final edit. Uh, you might get the recordable maybe a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, depending on how early you were offered the gig. Maybe it's several months later.
Okay.
And then you go through also with your director. You might hop on a call with the director to talk about the approach of it. How
Hmm.
are we going to handle some of these things? And I mean, you of course read it. I hope
Yeah.
you read it. You make your notes. Everyone makes their notations differently as well, and you highlight, you
Oh,
research, any words that are going to pop out. So at least for me, I know that I need to highlight or underline something where it's like this word is coming up, and I have this program called I Annotate, where
oh,
I can click on the recording button and then I listen to you or a Forvo or someone saying it, and then I can record it and put it in the text
oh,
so that
interesting.
as I'm going through and saying, and the monkey hand plant, also known as, and then here
Yeah.
comes the Latin word, and, and then I can sort of take a breath, listen to it again, okay, record it, take a breath, so that the editors can then later put it together smoothly
Oh, interesting.
so that it sounds like I just did it all in one breath because I was just that good. A lot of times we have to, take a step, listen to it again, sound it out, go back. But I mean, this was a nonfiction, so this is going to be prepared, prepped differently than a mystery or fiction or something else would. For me, it was really reading through, highlighting everyone's names, highlighting all the different plants. And then because some of the locations were in Belgium, that piqued my curiosity. I started looking
Okay.
at those sort of things. I mean, to be honest, when we have time, I know at least me, I do nerd out a bit. Like I'll go down the rabbit hole on certain things.
Oh, wow.
But the point of a narrator, in my opinion, we try to get out of the way of the
Hmm.
story and of the writing, where the whole point is for us to just, lend our voice to the text, but not to put our opinion or anything else on top of it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But also, I think a great audiobook narrator has a voice that you want to spend time with, you know? And so that's important.
That's nice of you to say. Thank you. I mean, I think whenever someone really is interested in the material, that shines through.
Yeah,
If someone isn't interested in it, then it's not going to come across the same way as someone who's really passionate about that.
right.
And I remembered being extremely passionate about it, and I follow some of the people now on Instagram, and
Oh, no.
I took a picture of my son with a pine cone today. I mean, like I learned so
Oh,
much from this
I love that. Well, what are so tell me about some other cool projects you've worked on though. Like, and so in your audiobook career, what have been some highlights?
That's a fun question. Thank you. A couple that spring to mind. One is how, so I live in Belgium, and a lot of people associate Belgium with the French language.
Uh-huh.
I live on the Flemish side, which is Dutch. It's a dialect of the Dutch language. And I speak French, but somehow, with my luck, I ended up on the Dutch speaking side. And so I speak Dutch now. And my very first audiobook was a Dutch speaking character.
Oh,
So she had to have the accent throughout and had to say a few words, not too much, but that was a very sort of fun and funny experience for me, this language that
Wow.
I never intended to learn. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, here we are. And then a project that I'm currently working on now that also just has so much incredible language on it, in it and on it. And I'm almost over researching because I'm just like with this one, I just got so consumed by the subject. It was
Mm,
just it's just so fascinating.
mhm.
I mean, I think a lot of us in that choose to get into this work, we're curious people,
Yeah.
you know. So you know, it's a labor of love, but then we all learn so much, from it as
Right.
well. Um, so I think those are two that pop out to me right off the bat. Right off the bat, yeah.
Yeah. And how long does the process take? Like, how big a chunk of your work life are you setting aside every time you do a book?
To be honest, again, it depends on the book.
Okay.
This book wasn't so long. It wasn't a ton
Hmm.
of pages, and it had such beautiful illustrations that uh, maybe the audiobook listeners don't get, but the
Yeah.
readers got for the visuals. But even though it was a shorter book, um, I think because of the language, this one took me, probably maybe something that was a little bit longer, but that was
Mm,
just written for 10-year-olds, you know,
yeah.
where it's like something about yeah, elementary school, or um a subject that didn't have anything, you know, a lot of times it's about the language. Let me put it that way.
Right. Right.
Sometimes it's about the language and the content. If I'm
Yeah.
doing a book, I did a book where there was some extremely difficult content where I'm
Mm,
in my booth, like literally breaking down.
yeah.
And so that also took a long time to get through because, again, in order to serve the story and help with everything going on its way, you also have to be, in a certain thing. So, yeah, it just sort of depends.
Right. Yeah. No, I can
Um,
see that.
but you definitely have prep. And again, depending on how long the book is, you prep it. And then you might have, let's say, 4 days in studio. And
Okay.
then you have a few days off. And then you get your edits back. And then you do those for half a day.
Right. And are you going into a studio in Belgium, or are you recording at home now?
To be honest, it depends. I do both. This
Okay.
one was recorded in my home studio
Okay.
because it was available at the time. There wasn't construction. But lately, I was having some power outages. There was something happening in the area that I had to go into studio,
Hmm.
for some projects due to extenuating circumstances.
Right.
And both are fine. I
Yeah.
think I prefer, and also it's sort of depending on what's happening in my life. Do I prefer to be in my home studio, or do I prefer to go into studio?
Yeah. I'm sure, especially with kids, it's a real thing. Working
Yeah.
from home with little ones is a
Yes.
whole different thing.
Yes. 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 But now everyone's in daycare or school, so it's a little bit better.
That's good. Well, anybody who has questions, you can put them in the chat at any time. But I'm so interested in the fact that you speak so many languages because it's
Not all
not just
fluently.
not all fluently, but some, right? You can get by in what, 4 or 5 languages?
I can get by in like 5, and then I can find the bathroom in another 3, maybe something.
That is super impressive. I've always spoken pretty decent Spanish, and I'm trying to add Italian, and they just get hopelessly mixed up. So I don't know if you have any suggestions about how to compartmentalize them in your brain. I just don't get how that works.
I mean, to be honest, I would say the short version is more input. That's really all I
Oh,
can. That's all I can offer. I still mix up things because sometimes whatever's floating at the top,
yeah.
what's closest to grab onto, that's what our brain throws out. I said a Dutch word to my dad this afternoon. Dutch is like at the bottom of my languages, but it's also the most recent. It's the one
The
that I'm
most recent. Yeah.
using on a daily basis. For me, yeah, I don't know. I used to do that a lot with French and Spanish, but
Uh-huh.
again, because only because of the one that I was using more than the other, even though the other one
Right.
was technically stronger, like you were saying with your Spanish, my French was stronger.
Yeah.
But there were certain words that I knew for some reason in Spanish
Yes.
instead. And it was like, oh, yeah, input, 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 input.
Right.
And then always have a friend to talk to.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That would be helpful. That
Because
and
yeah,
traveling, right? Like,
also, because otherwise you're going to forget how to say screwdriver,
yes.
or just call everything the
Right.
thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so we have our first question. So Evelyn wants to know, are you paid by the hour or paid by the page? Do they,
That's a good question.
how does that part work?
You know, Evelyn, that's a good question. It's a good question because voice work is very funny in the sense that we audiobook narration is different than like a regular voice job. So we're paid by finished hour. So however long
Finished
the book
hour.
is going to be,
Okay.
that's how you're paid. And what's funny is, to be honest, it gives you, of course, an incentive to do well in the booth because if you spent 50 hours to record
Yeah.
instead of 10, maybe it should have only taken you 15 hours, but you didn't prepare well, and so it took you
Right.
30 hours. Well, no, it's not, it's a difficult, or not difficult, it's a contested system, of course, of payment. But it's something where usually you can kind of work it out because again, you are prepping, you're doing your
Yeah.
time. If you're recording from your home studio, then that's electricity and this and this and this, and what can you write off on your taxes and la la la. But I think
Right.
the short version is we're paid by finished hour, and we try to negotiate a fair and rate and wage for our experience level and for maybe the difficulty of the book, for example.
Yeah. You know, well, let me get to Pauline's question, but then I have another one for you. But oh, she wants to know more about learning languages. So, do
Hi,
you
Pauline.
have like an app that you recommend? Or she also says, and how to pick which of several correct pronunciations to use. But
Oh, that's a good one.
okay,
So I'm gonna go in the reverse order.
okay,
How do we choose? Sometimes it's up to the publishing, not the publishing house. Sometimes it's up to the production house. So a lot of people will say, what, go to Merriam-Webster first for the
okay,
pronunciation. And even within Merriam-Webster, they might have this is the first pronunciation and this is the second. And
interesting.
sometimes the second is an accepted yet incorrect
Mm,
pronunciation.
hmm.
I'm someone who said foliage my whole life, only to be
Oh,
told that it's foliage. And I'm like, you know
foliage.
what? I graduated from university saying foliage.
Right.
um, so sometimes it's really up to the producers with whom you're working that they'll say, please use this one. When it comes to sometimes finding foreign language words that appear in the book or regionalisms, there's this a couple of fantastic websites. One is called Forvo, and that's a word pronounced by maybe an American or an Australian or a UK English speaker, or maybe it's pronounced by someone in a different language or with a different accent. So Forvo is one that I like to use a lot.
Forvo.
Forvo.
Okay.
And
Forvo.
and there's another one called Youglish, and Youglish is sort of like YouTube for words where or maybe a name, I'll type in Amy Stewart.
Yeah.
And I need examples of people saying Amy Stewart. And then it's really just a compilation of maybe people interviewing saying, and here
Oh,
comes Amy
interesting.
Stewart. And then that way you can get, if there's no first source material that you can get, okay, well, here's the general consensus. And then a lot
Wow.
of times, if you're available, the authors aren't always available.
Yeah.
We say, please, how do you want us to say this?
Right, right.
Yeah, I guess regarding the languages, I really can't stress input enough. Apps can only do so much.
Yeah.
I think the more you're really into the language, if you love it, and if you find other ways to yeah, to I was going to say absorb it, to digest, to eat the
Hmm.
language, to
Yeah,
consume the language. Is
right.
it movies, Korean horror films? Is it music? Is it soap operas? Is it poetry?
Right.
So I would say find a language that you love, that you're interested in, and then find ways to hear it in
Yeah.
that language, whether it's radio or a cooking show or whatever. And then find a friend where you can talk to sometimes. And I'm not going to lie, a lot of us talk to ourselves. You hear that a lot from, I'm not calling myself a polyglot, but you hear people saying, I didn't have anyone to talk to. And so at some point, you have to say it out loud.
Yeah, right.
I'm putting the cheese in the
Yes.
fridge.
Yeah, right, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many apps out there. I think that's just sort of a trial and error.
Hmm.
Which one do you like and why?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. That's cool. That's amazing. It's so impressive. So I also wanted to ask you, you guys keep putting questions in the chat if you have them, but I also wanted to talk about the thing everyone's talking about right now, which is AI. Because so I'm a member of the Authors Guild, which is sort of the closest we have to a union for authors.
Hmm.
And they put out a big statement about AI, and they didn't say anything about audiobook narration or design and illustration, or translation. And those are three very human skills, right?
Hmm.
So I actually reached out to them and they were very responsive about it. And I was like, we need to stand by our audiobook narrators. We need to stand by our foreign translators. Like these are real people and we want them doing this job. I just wonder, does it come up yet for you as kind of is it
Oh,
a thing in your world?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was actually
Yeah.
just trying to find there's also a sort of collective or guild, if you will, of audiobook narrators that have come together um, to try to fight AI in audiobooks because it's already there, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially, I understand people saying, I want to get my book out there, and this is the only way that I can afford to do so. What's so tricky about AI is, I mean, at the end of the day, contracts are tricky and have always been tricky for artists. We sign away so much
Yeah. You do.
without reading it. And so there have been so many people who have said, "Hey, I heard a commercial. It was my voice. I didn't do that." And then, you
Wow.
go back and you find out that when you signed up for something, or there's all these different voiceover websites where you're maybe doing an audition, and apparently
Hmm.
some of them might keep your voice in a voice bank, and you didn't know
Wow.
that. And so that's how
Wow.
some people have found it out. Um, so I mean, at the end of the day, and not to get all philosophical, but the first thing, so everyone hears, in utero, we hear voices,
Yeah.
so I think that there's just something so, yeah, um, I'm not really sure how to communicate it properly. There's just something there's so, even if you say, oh, wow, that's a really good imitation, it'll never be, you
Yeah.
know, a replacement. I do,
Right.
so I don't know, and I don't know how to articulate it well. I do hope that consumers will see how soulless it becomes if people allow AI to take over. Um, I would hope that even in the creative world that we can just say, you know what, we understand the benefits, or sometimes where those shortcuts are needed to help with editing or
Hmm.
something else. But to actually read the book, I really hope that people will understand that that's just not the way to go.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like you get that for one thing, you get a sense of people breathing. There is this kind of like in and out, but also just the very subtle nuance of a tiny bit of sarcasm or a tiny bit of sorrow, or like the poetry and language is very, for me, like for me as an author, like I read my books out loud usually 2 or 3 times during the process because I want them to feel spoken.
Yeah.
And even how we like, as you're reading, as you're narrating, sometimes you're deciding to kind of throw away a word,
Mm.
versus really hit a word. And those choices are very much about, because you understand how to get the emotion behind this, how to get the mood across, how to get the vibe across, how to make the point. And I just feel like that's, that gets lost.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
100%. And I think I feel like this, it feels a bit like a deja vu. I think we talked about this. For me, I could really tell that you spoke and read your book aloud.
Mm.
That's very obvious because it just flowed so easily. It was so easy to just say it, other than Latin
Yeah, right. I know.
for me.
I know.
Um, but like you said, there's a wink, there's a hesitation, there's a pause. Mm,
Yeah.
there's struggling. Maybe there's something that's been said before that in the narration it will help the flow of the story if we lean into it a little bit more. So I do hope that at the end of the day it'll be, one of those Lord of the Rings style, battles at the end with the orcs, and we prevail, because I mean it would just be like the darkest, saddest day,
Right.
if we allow AI to take over
Yeah.
art.
Oh, yeah. I know.
I mean, we've already seen it with that
Agreed.
orchestra. I'm like, what's happening here? I mean,
Right.
we've seen keep it as the experiment, as your science project, whatever. Get the data that you need, but please let us just continue to do our work here.
Yes. Well, I think that's something, and if there's ever any authors watching this, this is something that we can really take a stand on, is that we want our audiobooks narrated by humans. We want translations done by humans. We want art and illustration and design done by humans. Like there's a
Yeah,
reason for that. It matters.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, in the contracts, also that
Yes.
I mean, I know I've started putting it into mine. You're not allowed to duplicate me. You're not allowed to
Yeah.
take a sample. You're not. I All of these things that we before we never thought we had to do. you
Right.
know, and now all of us are adding these little clauses into our contracts as
Yeah.
well.
Right. I mean, most authors are not able to get it. We're not able to get this in our
Mm.
contracts with publishers yet. And I don't know if we will. And so of the 14 books I've written, 12 were already used to train AI.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, without my permission. So
Mm.
even if it had been in the contract, they just took the books. Like they just took them.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how we put that genie back in the bottle, but
It's
whatever.
out. It's
It
out.
is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, tell me what else you're up to acting wise. Like what else have you got going on right now?
In this very present moment, I'm finally taking a break.
Yeah.
I think as you know, I have a 4 month old, and we're now visiting my parents. But when I get back after the holiday, the vacation, I jump right back into finishing one book. I have 2 books coming up after that. A
Hmm.
multi-voice, which I think is so much fun to
Cool.
work with other narrators.
Yeah.
And then I also have a tour of a show that I've been doing in Belgium kind of since I started in Belgium.
Oh,
We sort of keep getting these pop up of, hey, come do this thing. And so we'll be going to Sweden for a month
huh.
to a few different theaters. So that's going to be so much fun to be on the stage again.
Yeah. And are
And
you
then
performing in Dutch? Is this something where you're performing in Dutch?
this one, back to the languages, this is a sort of a piece from the diaspora. And so we are
Oh,
8 women of color, all from different backgrounds. So there's Dutch, there's English, there's French, there's Lingala, there's Kinyarwanda, there's Zulu. I think one of the actors speaks. Um, there's Afrikaans. Am I missing something? I'm probably missing something.
yeah.
There was Bulu at one point, but I know that that actress isn't coming. So I'm curious about the other language that's going to be involved. So this one is it's primarily English, Dutch, and French, but then with
Okay.
some other languages popping in there. And then I have a very small role in a film, maybe.
Okay.
I mean, we just take what
I
we
know.
go. I mean, I was a theater actor, and then the voice came later, and then the on camera work came even later. So I love all of it, and I try to do as much of all of it as possible.
Uh-huh. What do you do you have any big goals or things you're working towards next? Is there sort of
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Again, being an American in Belgium, there's not the most work on stage,
huh?
as you might think. So, my coaching, I do a lot of American accent coaching. So, I've been
Oh,
coaching, but now I'm hoping that maybe for some of the theaters and groups for whom I've been coaching, that maybe I can find a way to bring my show. I have a couple of different solo shows that I'm trying to revamp and reboot, and
cool.
I'm trying to find that energy again because it's a lot to produce and bring your own piece for a very
Yes.
different public. And I've still not, yeah, I've still never played my own show in Belgium, and so
Mhm.
that's sort of my next. Come on, Jade, let's do that again. That would be my next goal.
Interesting. Wow, I did not realize that you did voice coaching too. That's kind of fascinating. Like
Well,
I can see how that's
specifically American accent
American
coaching.
accent. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Well, I've often thought that, one of the nice things about being a writer is that I can kind of decide what my next project is and just start it. I
Hmm.
mean, at some point, I would like there to be a publisher involved because otherwise, it's just a Word document that lives on my computer, and I want to turn that into a book, and I do need other people at that point. But the initial part is me having an idea and making that happen. And my brother works in Hollywood, so I sort of have thought a lot about the fact that there are other, there's certainly everyone in acting and dance, drama, all of that, they're kind of depending on other people to say, yes, we want you to be a part of our thing. You have to audition. You sort of are waiting for the phone to ring, as opposed to just being able to like, I'm gonna just make this thing. So it's just a different kind of way in, I
Yeah,
think, that you often have than like what I often have.
for sure. I mean, there's two things. One of my burning questions
Oh,
is about what you were talking about, and then the other one is, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Frances Ha. Um,
gosh. Yeah, but it's
th-
been a while.
a while, right? That
Yeah.
was sort of something about the actor who, she really did just say, okay, I'm just going to write it and figure out a way to make it. Because
Yeah,
all of
that's
us
true.
have those, we all have those ideas scribbled on a napkin, or in
Right.
a notebook full of things. And I mean, it is hard to fully realize it, but if you're able to make that happen, I think now, like you said, more and more people are finding ways to make their own content and then
Mhm.
bring in, the money
Right.
afterwards. With Insecure, that happened. She did what was it called? Awkward Black Girl on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then thanks to her doing that sort of just on her own, sort of guerrilla style, then it got so much attention and then it became
Right.
Insecure. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
again, that's sort of like one in a million.
Yeah.
Let me know when I'm able to ask my question because it is
Oh, I'm
linked to
sorry.
that one.
Yes, go ahead, by all means.
I wasn't sure if I could. So, so I saw you just came back from traveling for work.
Yeah.
You traveled for Flower Confidential.
Hmm.
But Tree Collectors, you said, was all online.
Pretty much. We were
Okay.
kind of still locked down when I was doing all that. Yeah.
So my question was, do you find the story along the way, like the real story along the way, or do you already have like an outline and a rough draft and then choose your journey?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the book. So, like with Tree Collectors, when I did the proposal for Tree Collectors, I kind of thought this was mostly just going to be a book about tree geeks geeking out about trees. So I sort of thought I needed someone who's into oaks and someone who's into palms and someone who's into apple trees, and that we would mostly kind of be talking about the trees.
Mm,
I didn't know how personal these stories were going to be. And part of it might have been because we were in this global pandemic and feeling very vulnerable and also kind of lonely. So it was sort of, you were just happy to have anyone to talk to, and people just really opened up. But I think also it's just people have these extraordinary relationships with trees, and so it just all
yeah.
came out. So for this book, I probably had a list of 10 or 15 people that I'd already spoken to, and I had a plan for how I would find the rest. But what I didn't know was that, I interviewed maybe 100 people total and chose 50 for the book. And I didn't know that the whole process was going to be about these layers of really personal stories, and that was the um, balance that I had to find was
Mm-hmm.
not so much what kind of tree were they talking about, but what kind of story did they have to tell,
Yeah.
which was kind of great.
I mean, you found a fantastic balance. That's actually leads into my second question,
Oh, okay.
if I may.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, so I did read through your Q&A, and that was one of the questions was how many did you find and how? But then my question became, well, will there be a part two
Oh,
with those other 50 or others? Are there more straight? I mean, yeah, or is it the thing of, you know what, this one I'm gonna turn the proverbial page, I'm done, I'm gonna move on to the next thing.
yeah, well, it's kind of funny because I definitely got a lot of feedback of like, we would love to see you to do another book like this. And it is that thing where, you do something, then people are like, keep doing that one thing. So it's, in terms of like a format of a book of going around and profiling 50 people who do a thing, I was like, no, I'm not going to keep, like that worked for that was the right container for
Hmm.
this idea. But but no, every book is really different for me. So I think I'm not sure I'm supposed to say yet exactly what my next book is about. But anyway, it's much more of a narrative book and kind of a road trip book. So I'll be traveling around America. And I will be talking to people, but it's not a little bits, it's not like
Hmm.
50 little chapters. It's one cohesive narrative. So yeah, every book ends up being kind of different like that. Like, what is the best format for this
Yeah,
kind of idea?
but you set off on the journey already with knowing what you want in mind.
Kind of, for me, I find that if I get a good idea for a book, like, yeah, I get lots of bad ideas for books, but if I get a good idea for a book, it kind of like blooms in my head all at once. Usually I'm
Cool.
sort of like, oh, that would be an interesting book. And then I'm like, wait a minute, but then it could be this and it could be that. And maybe I do a little tiny bit of research because I want to make sure no one else has already written this book. And I also
Mm,
want to, and I have a few questions I need to answer. And then I'm like, oh my God, it turns out it's way more interesting than I thought. So but that thing where the whole idea kind of presents itself all at once, like it's a whole fully formed thing, to me, that's the sign that this is a good idea.
okay.
When it's like, it is all just here, and your
Nice.
job is just to not ruin it too much. Like, I will definitely ruin it. Like, it's only downhill. As an idea, it's perfect.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
it's only downhill from there once I have to actually start
Oh
executing it.
man.
But
Oh, fantastic. And is there, in the same way that we have a process of once we've received the material until it's been released, do you have, I mean, it could be months, it could be years, it could be decades. How long does, or do you always have like, oh, there's that one that I want to work on, but it's just not the time? How long does it take you sort of from idea to publishing?
well, I definitely have book ideas that have been lingering around forever. And Tree Collectors was kind of one of those. Like,
Mm,
I met this, Lynn Iser, I met over 10 years ago. Um, and I just sort of thought, well, that's weird. You collect trees, what's up with that? But then, I met another tree collector and I'm like, oh, there's two of you. Well, that's super weird. And then a third one, so I kind of had a little list going in the back of my mind, but I just couldn't see it as a book. I was like, I don't
mm,
get how this is a book. Um, it wasn't until I figured out that I could illustrate it that I understood it as a giftier kind of book than what I
Hmm.
had been imagining. So, like, that's an idea that kind of kicked around for 10 years. And I definitely have book ideas that are older than that, that who knows, I might get to someday. But once I decide like this is the next book, and I've had the conversation with my agent, and she's like, "Yeah, I like it. Go work on it." Then it's usually a few months for me to get the proposal together because I want it to be really fully developed. And so then we shop that around, and hopefully someone says yes. And if they do, usually the contract I sign, like these days, I'm getting 18 months
Okay.
as a due date. Publishers sometimes like it faster. They want 12 months. It used to be 2 years, but it's
Mm,
hard to get that now. But since I'm doing the art as well, that's kind of how I explain it. Like, look, if I
yeah,
wrote it in a year and then you handed it to an illustrator and they took 6 months, that would be 18 months. So there's the 18, that's kind of
yeah.
how it goes.
Will
Yeah.
you illustrate anything else? This was the
Yeah.
first book that you illustrated,
I,
correct?
I think I will. This one was fun, and fortunately, I mean, I very deliberately said I'm going to do this in this style that looks like it's just in my sketchbook. Like
Yeah,
they're not going to be like finished studio portraits or something. So in some ways, I made that easy on myself by, like this is just kind of like the kind of drawing, just daily drawing that I do. Um, so yeah, I can see doing it again. It is one of those things I don't want to turn art into too much of a job because then it
yeah,
stops being fun. So there is that, like I'm a little bit like, if I make this too much like work, then I'm not going to want to do it anymore. And then what am I doing for fun? So I have
yeah.
to kind of watch that.
Because it's not that you would say, "Hi, I'm Amy Stewart, author illustrator." No, or do you just describe yourself as a painter or as a artist as well, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, until tree collectors, I would just say that I'm an author and that I just make art as a hobby, and it's kind of doesn't even come up that much. But with this, it sort of became more of a like author illustrator kind of thing. And I do like the ability to, you can really expand on a story with visuals. I mean, as you know, like this is something I think about with acting is that, and with screenwriting is that you have so much more than the words because you have all the visuals,
Mm,
the set, the scene, the people, but then you also have sound. So you have people's voices, but also music and sound effects. And so like with a play or a movie, the words on the page are such a kind of a small part
mm,
of what the viewer experiences. Whereas when you write a book, it's all on the words. And that's a lot for words to do.
yeah.
So
I don't know. I
the
mean, there's that
illustrations
there's that
help.
happy marriage, right? There's that.
Yeah.
I think there's totally that happy marriage because we've all seen, especially, I don't want to say especially movies, but I think um, if you see a movie that's visually stunning, if the story, is lacking, you say,
Mm,
you still
yeah.
say, it missed something. With
Right.
theater, if the story isn't there, it's even more difficult,
Yes.
But I mean,
Right.
so I don't know. I think again, that's such a hats off to writers.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is interesting. Like I've tried reading screenplays before, and I'm like, even the screenplay to a movie I love, I read the
Yeah.
screenplay and I'm like, wow, there is
It's
not a lot here.
But I think that's also, like you said, that's also sometimes a testament to actors, to directors, to the collaboration, to the backstory of how people, infuse all of that into those words, even if it's just like
Right.
that one liner.
Yeah. So we've had some more questions come in that weirdly just showed up. So my apologies to people who put them in a bit ago. That's kind of strange. Anyway, so I think this is a compliment that you have wonderful enunciation. And
Thank
does
you.
that come naturally? How do you work at that? How does that happen?
I think I will say, to be honest, thanks to my mom was a language speech pathologist, and I couldn't say my R's until I was 10 or 11.
Wow.
So so I spent a few years over enunciating my R's, for
Wow,
example.
yeah.
I still trip up if there's like particularly is like my nightmare regularly anything where there's those R's and then the ly are still super difficult for me. Again, I think coming from theater, we train,
Yeah.
enunciation, articulation a lot. And then, not gonna lie, um, film, has that fantastic luxury of being able to, you get to mumble and whisper what are you saying because everyone has the subtitles on.
Uh-huh.
But it also allows something different and deeper to come out. In a book,
Right.
that doesn't work. I've tried it, and then I got so many notes back. She's mumbling.
Oh,
So I did try. It doesn't work. So
interesting.
thank you. And yes, we do work at it. And again, depending on how long you've been in the game, how often are you in the booth,
Yeah,
we're still doing those articulation exercises and maybe a few warm-ups before we get
interesting.
going. Otherwise, you're tripping over. I know, at least for me, all anything with an ly at the end.
Oh, wow. Okay. You know. Well, I know you have to go right at the end of the hour, so I'm going to get these in quickly though. When you're considering your approach to a reading, do you try to craft your work with a specific audience in mind, or do you take more of a general approach as to who the listener's going to be
Is
with
that
your
for you or for me?
I think this is for you with your narration.
Oh,
Like,
no. No, to be honest, again, depending on, we try to I try to approach the genre as honestly as I can. And then if I'm chosen, then it means that whatever I'm doing is what the author usually, or mostly has in their mind. And then if they say, oh, you know what, but could you actually this or this, then they'll give those notes as well. And that's also why I love working with directors, because they can also guide you along that way. And if you're getting off, uh, like you said, for the audience at all, oh, maybe that's too heavy, or oh, maybe that's too light, or that's too this or that. So to be honest, I don't. Maybe
okay,
that sounds very strange. We just have to be so, we just have to honor the text and the writing and the
right.
author's intentions so much that pretty much takes care of it
Uh-huh.
so far.
Interesting. So far. Let's see. Kelly wants to know, do you hear from the publisher or an agent? Do you have to audition for these audiobook jobs? How does it like
Sure.
work?
Um, I think I've only gotten one book through my agent, but that's
Okay.
because I started audiobooks before I got an agent.
Yeah.
And for the rest, he doesn't really touch my voice work for the rest. Um, I got into narration thanks to a friend of mine who's been trying to get me into it for years, but I was bouncing around so much
Yeah.
pre-COVID, like you said, that I was never available to go in studio, and I never lived anywhere long enough to make a studio.
Yeah.
Um, so since COVID, there's a few different platforms. So you're on the roster of different
Okay.
publishing houses. So
Right.
so I'm on the roster of a few different publishing houses, and that's how through Ahab that I got this book. But I believe it was a direct offer that I got. Sometimes we
Yeah.
do have to audition though, because sometimes they don't know, or sometimes they're like, oh, you know what? I like Jade, but I don't know how she is in that genre, and maybe it's not a good match. Or
Yeah.
maybe there's something about accents or languages or age,
Hmm.
or delivery, like you said. Sometimes you can love someone's work, and at the end of the day, it just doesn't match, or it just doesn't vibe with the writing. So yeah, there's
Hmm.
sometimes still auditions involved, lots of auditions involved. But I think I've almost never been approached by an author.
Mm.
The days of
Okay.
ACX, then sometimes,
Right.
but I I think I've only been approached by an author a handful of times, and for the rest, it's the publishers.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. You mentioned an upcoming project that'll involve multiple voice actors. So what determines when a publisher goes this way? Um, yeah,
Not gonna
sounds
lie,
good.
that might be a question for a publisher. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure because I've listened myself. I love audiobooks. I've listened myself to audiobooks where it's supposed to be, I don't know, 20 different people, and it's
Yeah.
all the same person. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And then sometimes publishers will say, you know what, these are five very distinct personalities and perspectives, and again, maybe different genders or sexes are involved, or different accents and backgrounds and ages are involved. And they'll say, you know what, won't this be a more engaging and honest listening experience if? So the publisher makes a lot of those decisions.
Mm.
Again, I think sometimes together with the author on that. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's whatever's going to lend to the storytelling the most.
Yeah.
I love a multi voice.
Yeah.
I also like listening to them though.
Right.
So I know I'll even write to publishers saying, put me on a multi voice because I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And again, as a listener, I prefer those versus Bob reading 10 different, 10 different chapters by
Yeah.
10 different people. Sometimes it depends. It sometimes
Right.
also depends on the writing as well. If it's a point of view, a first person point of view, or like a sort of third person close point of view, that can also change it.
Mm. Well, the last question here, and then I wanted to ask you something about that too, if we have time. Barbara asked if there's a way that listeners of the audiobook can see the illustrations. And I think the answer is no. At least in my case, I wish there was a
I don't
QR code or
know.
something. Yeah.
I don't know. I know, Barbara, sometimes at the end of the audiobook, it might give, I know sometimes there's a glossary or some PDF that comes along. I know when I've worked on things where there's like a lot of maps involved, I don't know.
Hmm.
But I know
Right.
on your website, there's some beautiful illustrations.
There's, yeah, a little of it's there, but no, that would be very cool. Well, we are, what I was going to say, my last little quick comment here is that for the first time with tree collectors, they asked me if I wanted a guy to be my narrator. And I have to say, I thought that was a little, I was like, I don't know. I kind of, like, it had never occurred to me to have a
I see what you mean.
male narrator of my voice. So that's an interesting question.
That is an interesting
I
question.
know.
Did you hear any samples just to hear it?
They did send me some, and I was like, I kind of just told them, I was like, seems a little weird to me, but you guys are the professionals, so I don't know. I don't know why that felt so strange, but it did.
I no, I don't blame you. I'm one of I've worked with a few different theater directors where some actors and also some directors, they just know exactly this is it. And then I've worked with others that are like, I know it's wrong, I just want to see it anyway.
Yeah,
And so maybe it was that. Maybe it
maybe.
was let's just make sure,
Yeah, I don't know.
so it might have been that.
Yeah,
I think that could have been interesting. Who knows? I'm glad that I was on it.
I know. Yes, me too. I
I'm
know.
glad it was me.
And that's a lovely note for us to end on. I'm so glad we got to meet, and I hope we meet in person someday. I hope we work
Absolutely.
together again someday.
Would love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next time you're in Europe, please let me know.
Oh, totally. Yeah, great. I have a friend in
If I
Belgium
ever
now.
make it
How
to
about that,
Oh,
everybody?
there I am. There I am. And if I ever come over to Portland, absolutely will poke you.
Oh, totally. Gosh, that would be so great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. It was wonderful to have you all here. And yeah, thank you, Jade.
Take care.
All right.
Good night,
Take care.
everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Good night. Bye, everybody.